Hello, scholars and saints. We are here with another podcast, talk, reading. So I just got Vita Contemplativa from Byung-Chul in the mail last week. And I thought I would do it. At first I thought I was maybe going to go over a little bit of Hegel. We talked about the introduction to the philosophy of history today in class, which is different, I found out, from Hegel's lectures on the history of philosophy. So I would say that the introduction to the philosophy of history, which you can find just on Amazon, I think it's like a Hackett edition, that's what it's called, what the collection is called, is probably the most accessible reading of Hegel. And granted, I haven't ventured a lot into Hegel, but I have read some of Phenomenology of the Spirit and also Philosophy of Mind. And this introduction to the philosophy of history is so interesting. I mean, it's dense, but it is like you will understand every sentence, and it's beautiful. So I'd like to do a talk on it at some point, but I feel it's only 6, but I feel tired and sleepy, and I think I did at the end of my class. So I don't know. It's just been such a good year in many respects, but also in other respects, just really emotionally and physically tiring. So I don't know if anyone feels like that. It's I'm glad to be where I am. I feel like I'm moving forward on so many things, but certain aspects of it just make me feel like I just want to go to bed, go to sleep, which actually for me, since I've dealt with insomnia for all of my life, difficulty sleeping all of my life, I welcome that. That's fine. That's fine if I finally react to life's challenges by sleeping. Okay, so on the back cover it says, and I am using a sound filter because one of you mentioned that would be helpful. So you can tell me, it might not help, but you can tell me if it is or if it isn't, and I'll try something else. Okay, in our busy and hurried lives, we are losing the ability to be inactive. Human existence becomes fully absorbed by activity, even leisure. Treated as a respite from work becomes part of the same logic. So he takes up this idea in several of his books, saying that our achievement society has made everything about work. When we are off work, we're really just, fueling back up so we can go to work and do more work. There's not a real separation. The focus is always on work. It's kind of like what one might, learn in feminist studies about the quote-unquote male gaze, and a hetero world where there are women who have internalized this male gaze. They're always looking upon themselves with the male gaze. And so this is somewhat consciously, but then also somewhat unconsciously, seeing themselves, seeing their worth, getting dressed, putting on makeup, etc. It's all under the male gaze. What does the female gaze? And we can say that this is very archaic and old school, and we're moving in, and we have been moving for a while in the direction of freedom of expression and feminism and just all genders and fluidity. But you ask yourself, what's the female gaze? What's the female gaze for women? And I think you can really explore that just easily and directly if you are in the lesbian community. You can start to understand, what room there is to expand and to experiment with your own expression and, I guess clothes and makeup and things like that. Like, you could start to ask, well, what is attractive from my point of view about other women outside of a hetero world where you're like, women are comparing with women because of the male gaze. But to completely shelve the male gaze, you start to realize it's actually, even if you don't feel like you've internalized patriarchy and it's not like a burden to you as a woman, it's still such a new, surprising experiment once you kind of delve into that, that you realize how normative the male gaze is. So I don't know why I've started talking about that. I'm sorry. Maybe I have to listen to my video again. Why did I talk about that? I think I was talking about boundaries and norms and the difficulty when you go to one extreme so much in a society of having any space for anything else. I think that was maybe where I was going. Intense life today means, first of all, more performance or more consumption. We have forgotten that it is precisely inactivity, which does not produce anything, that represents an intense and radiant form of life. That's interesting. Like, the word inactivity, I think, could turn people off. The feeling I get from this and the essence I get from this, especially because I'm reading Taoist literature right now, and that's the week that we are in my world religions class that I'm teaching, and I'm just kind of enjoying revisiting it. And there's this concept of wu wei, which is effortless action, and it's kind of a method of getting things done and moving forward through the door of non-attachment, indifference, radical acceptance, letting go, but also the nothing doing, or the doing nothing, which is maybe focusing on who you are and your being and your character, so that you can align with the kind of material result that you would otherwise be seeking in maybe fruitless action and fruitless effort. So it's a way to go back to, Taoism calls it the dark enigma, or like the formless absence, the generative mother, it sometimes says, that generates the 10,000 forms unfolding. And so it's to go to, like, within, deeper into the source. I wrote a poem once that said, if you can't expand above on the earth, like a tree, if the tree can't grow, then go deep. Spread your roots and ground yourself. And so it's just kind of another sort of doorway or perspective. And I think that would be really helpful if he talked about this, and I think that's really where he's going, but we'll see. For Byung-Chul, I'm still in the back cover, inactivity constitutes the human. Without moments of pause or hesitation, acting deteriorates into blind action and reaction. When life follows the rule of stimulus response and need satisfaction, it atrophies into pure survival, naked biological life. If we lose the ability to be inactive, we begin to resemble machines that simply function. True life begins when concern for survival for the exigencies of mere life ends. The ultimate purpose of all human endeavor is inactivity. In a beautifully crafted ode to the art of being still, Han shows that the current crisis in our society calls for a very different way of life, one based on the Vita Contemplativa. I'm probably not emphasizing that word in the right way, but that's how I'm going to say it. He pleads for bringing our ceaseless activities to a stop and making room for the magic that happens in between. Life receives its radiance only from inactivity. And see, I think by using this word, and this happens from my perspective in all of his work, all of his writing, he uses a word and expects us to understand the nuance. And I've said once before, and I'll say it again because I think it's important, that I don't know who translated this, but we all know from reading Heidegger especially, but other German writers, and Han, I think, is probably writing in German. We all know that translating the German into English requires a pretty creative translation in terms of even a single word, because German words basically string multiple words together to make one word, and so that's why German words can appear long to maybe I don't know, English speakers and maybe others. And so you need, that's why you see the hyphens in Heidegger, because it's originally one word in German and it has to be 5 words in English with hyphens stuck together. And so I wonder in the German what his inactivity is, because in the English just saying inactivity I think is misleading. But I mean I get it, but it could be misleading. It could be. So one thing I was going to say, but I didn't pause, is that, for instance, if this still doesn't make sense to you, I don't think he would consider lounging on your couch and scrolling through YouTube shorts, Instagram reels, or TikTok would be inactivity for him. I think when he says inactivity, he's talking about a meaningful leisure time. And his point is that work is so, for many people, if you're not working in your vocation, it can be, and many people aren't, it can be, what's that word that I'm looking for? Not meaningless, but also meaningless. Tedious, I guess. It can be tedious. It can be exhausting because you're working so many hours of the day, and maybe you're doing really tedious things, but it's still whatever you're doing, it's exhausting. And so by the time you get home, if you live in the winter, in the US in the winter, right now it's dark at 4:30 or 5. You come home, it's dark, you're so tired, you don't even want to cook or eat. So you just maybe binge something on Netflix, or you're on your phone for hours and you're unwinding, but you can't do anything that's truly meaningful in your leisure time and your time off, that's rich and nourishing, because you're so burnt out that you are on survival mode. And so Han, I don't think ever, I think he's just critiquing. He's not necessarily telling us, well, what should we do? What can I do? I have to pay my rent. I have to work these 8 hours a day and live basically for work. I have to do this. I have to feel like this. I mean, I think that's for us to decide and to figure out and try to reconstruct our world. But he just doesn't like what he sees. So how can we change it? I mean, the how, I don't know. I mean, I would like to talk about that And if, I had to say something right now, it would be, it's just so hard because every situation is different. I think for me personally, I do consider that I have a vocation. I really love my job, and I think a lot of my hobbies are just extensions of my job. But I guess it can get exhausting, and I can also be sort of, get into the habit or the addiction of technology and abuse my leisure time, I guess. So I think for me, it's just trying to put away the technology, or just use the technology for music, dance, maybe get into a different energy realm or wavelength, or timeline, depending on if you're in the spiritual rhetoric of Gaia.com, to really be aware and be intentional and be disciplined, I think. But that's not available to everyone, I understand. You have to have a little bit of energy and time to do that, to even have that be an option or a choice for you. So I would say, if it is a choice, if there is an opportunity, then that's what you have to do. For the rest of people, for the rest of us, a big obstacle is just our world and our economic structure. And, I would say ideally people just need to get paid more and work less. So things need to cost less, or something in that direction would, I think, help. And for our world to shift to a more creative and thoughtful and philosophical mindset and motivation, so we start acting and behaving in ways that the jobs that are out there are more vocational than just, jobs that you have to take because that's the only job you can get and that's what pays the rent. So he has in the first page, the contents of this book. The chapters are titled Views of Inactivity, a marginal note on Zhuangzi, who is the second most famous Taoist writer and thinker. I think it's Shuangxu. I think maybe that's how you say it. From acting to being, absolute lack of being, the pathos of action, the coming society. And I know that if I am so interested in Eastern spirituality, I need to learn Chinese. And it's on my list. Okay, so, I have to read those again because I really wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about a pronunciation. Okay, Views of Inactivity, a marginal note on Shuangxu. From acting to being, absolute lack of being, the pathos of action, the coming society. Okay, that sounds interesting. So, for the third time, again, there's a page, and there are little quotes. The first one is from Paul Celan in his selected poems. You teach your hands, you teach your hands, you teach your hands to sleep. And the second one is Shakespeare. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. The third one is from Samuel Beckett. I gave up before birth. So interesting, he talks about sleep. Han has mentioned in interviews that he has trouble sleeping. Okay, views of inactivity. We increasingly resemble the sort of active people who roll as the stone rolls in obedience to the stupidity of the laws of mechanics. Because we look at life exclusively from the perspective of work and performance, we view inactivity as a deficiency that must be overcome as quickly as possible. Okay, so I have another thought on the how. Sometimes we do have a job that we can transmute into this concept of wu wei or effortless action, or think like more like scientific way of talking about it. I don't know if it's scientific, but there are studies on it called getting into the flow of it. Like, for instance, content creation. I was telling my eyebrows were shedding or something. I was telling my students, which students? Probably my film theory. Yes, okay. This is just during the introductions of my film theory class. So we were talking about the content that we consume, and then also if we create any content. And so there are a couple of students that have YouTube channels. And so we were talking about that, and I was sharing that, I have had, and some of you, or at least one of you listening knows this, but I would say I had, one or two versions of a YouTube channel before. It was like BookTube. It was mostly like, I think, two versions of BookTube. It might have been like BookTube, just literature, and then BookTube, I was trying to do like religious studies. And neither of them worked. I did each for about 3 months, and I deleted it because and I'm pretty sure that the reason that those versions kind of got discarded rather quickly was because I was focusing on production and work and performance instead of wu-wei, effortless action, getting into the flow. Part of that, because part of transmuting work in this way is finding pleasure and doing it for the self in a creative mode, regardless of monetization or profit or the algorithm or anything like that. Because focusing on pleasing the masses and focusing on monetization, as an example, or getting rich, getting famous, stifles creativity. And there are studies on this for why that happens. But what you end up doing, though, it's such a paradox, and this is what the spiritual and religious traditions talk about, including Taoism. The paradox is, once you redirect your focus and your intention toward more spiritual, heart-based, higher vibration, you can say however you want. Some of those descriptors might be triggering for you. I'm sorry, just motivations of integrity, maybe, I guess. Drop in the comments what you would prefer me say on that, how you would describe it. But when you shift your motivation to those other, those deeper, more spiritual reasons, then what you wanted in the beginning just naturally unfolds. It just kind of happens. It's when people talk about the universe being for them and they're just in alignment. It just does. The hard part is doing that. The hard part is letting go and taking the risk, because you are taking the risk because we all need to eat, right? But you have to have the faith. Human existence is fully absorbed by activity and thereby becomes exploitable. That's like the saddest thing. We are losing a sense for the kind of inactivity that is not an incapability, not a refusal, not just the absence of activity. Here we go. Here's the nuance. But a capacity in itself. Inactivity has a logic of its own language, temporality, architecture, magnificence, even its own magic. See, that's what I was saying. I was talking about the metaphysical, and there he is too. It is not a weakness or a defect, but rather an intensity, which is, however, neither seen nor acknowledged in our active and performance-driven society. We cannot access the riches of the realm of inactivity. See, there are riches there. Inactivity is a radiance within human existence. Today, it has paled into an emptiness with inactivity. Sorry, I was like not using my sound filter, I think, because I'm trying to read the book. This is difficult. I need to read that again because I wasn't listening to myself. We cannot access the riches of the realm of inactivity. Inactivity is a radiance. I think that's metaphysical language within human existence. Today has paled into an emptiness within activity. So the inactivity is more meaningful. And back to words again. I mean, inactivity, I'm not so triggered by his use of the word or the translation of inactivity that is inactivity, as I am some of his words that he chooses in his other books. Some examples of that would be when he talks about in critiques authenticity. Authenticity is such a great concept and word to me, especially like in my own particular way I want to redefine it. And, and he talks about like how it's bad to be smooth and it's good to be rough, and it's, there's no intimacy in touch, but you have to have some distance and look. And it just starts to seem a little arbitrary. But I think if he could be translated a little more in a nuanced way, or we could just read him in the German, he might not seem like that. But I'm not triggered by his inactivity because I know exactly what he means by my readings. So under capitalist relations of production, inactivity returns in the form of an encapsulated outside. We call it... Okay. Oh my goodness. That's so embarrassing. I had to delete some of my past videos from my laptop. That's so crazy. Okay, I have no idea where that stopped, but I'm going to start here. Under capitalist relations of production, inactivity returns in the form of an encapsulated outside. We call it leisure time because it serves the purpose of respite from work. It remains tied to the logic of work. As derivative of work, it represents a functional element of production. What thus appears is free time that does not belong to the order of work and production. We no longer know the holy, festive calmness. The Disappearance of Rituals book. Read that. That unites intensity of life with contemplation and is still able to unite them even when intensity of life grows into exuberance. Leisure time lacks both intensity of life and contemplation. It is a time that we kill so as to not get bored. It is not free living time, it is dead time. Intense life today means, first of all, more performance or more consumption. We have forgotten that it is precisely an activity which does not produce anything that represents an intense and radiant form of life. To oppose the compulsion of work and performance, we must create a politics of inactivity that is able to produce genuinely free time. I talk about this a little bit in an article that is going to, I guess, be coming out. Like, I won't believe it until I see it. But I talk about, because I'm really interested in this as well, I call it soul work. And I'll post it to one of my videos if you want to read it whenever it comes out. But sorry, now I'm distracted with thinking about my article. So it's interesting that he's using the phrase leisure time because I mean he could call it anything, right? Like he doesn't have to use leisure time. He's saying free time is good, leisure time is bad, but you could, I really don't like that he's using leisure time as something that's dead time. I think that's what he's doing. I don't know. I would choose a different descriptor. But again, this is a translation, so I don't know what the original is. So I see what he's saying, if we're mindlessly scrolling on TikTok, that's consumption, but true free time is free of consumption and production. Oh, actually, I know what I was going to say. Okay, so in my article, I was giving the example of soul work, academic writing as soul work. Academic writing can seem like drudgery, for sure, depending on your perspective. All writing can, even writing like a college essay, right? But if you shift your mindset to being curious about what you're talking about, inspiring yourself by reading, and then enjoying the lyricism of what you're writing, it turns into an activity of creativity and spiritual self-investigation and inquiry rather than work or performance or consumption. So some of it, I think, is mindset. Activity constitutes the human. The activity involved in any doing is what makes the doing something genuinely human. Without moments of pause or hesitation, acting deteriorates into blind action and reaction. Without calm, a new barbarism emerges. Oh, I just wasn't expecting that word. Silence deepens conversation. Without stillness, there is no music, just noise and sound. I think that's really lovely to mention silence, because that's true. It's something that I am trying to work on when I am invited on shows and I'm having a conversation. Because when I listen to people having a conversation, I think that I am impressed when there can be silence on the air, because it shows people are thinking. People usually aren't talking over each other in that respect. And it has to be like an intentional silence, I think. It's always, there's always an intention when we're trying to distinguish between the helpful and the non-helpful. But yeah, so just to let the silence be there. Without stillness, there is no music, just sound and noise. Play is the essence of beauty. When life follows the rule of stimulus response, need satisfaction, and goal action, it atrophies into pure survival, naked biological life. Life receives its radiance only from inactivity. That reminds me of when Baudrillard keeps talking about like charm. Han here keeps talking about radiance. If we lose the ability to be inactive, we begin to resemble machines that simply function. True life begins when concern for survival for the exigencies of mere life ends. The ultimate purpose of all human endeavor is inactivity. And I think that's, I don't know. Do I keep saying I think that's interesting? I don't know, probably. I would say that, yeah, I mean, I really align with this. I feel that this is really true. And I tell my students this. I say, When you have to do an essay, like my film theory students have to do 4 essays and they're doing 3 creative projects. When you're doing an essay, choose a topic that's actually personally nourishing to you. And this is what I would tell all of you if you're, those of you who are listening and in college. What's nourishing to you at this moment and in time? What do you need to hear? What do you want to investigate to aid in a transformation? Why would we do anything that doesn't aid in our transformation? And sometimes it just takes us pausing, remembering to breathe, and then continuing to move forward meditatively. I think when we do this, we can be more aware and present, and it can bring more life into our life. Action constitutes history, but it is not a force that forms culture. The origin of culture is not war, but the festival. Not the weapon, but the adornment. History and culture are not congruent. Culture is formed by diversion, excess, and detour. It is not produced by following the path that leads straight to the goal. The essence at the core of culture is ornamentation. Culture sits beyond functionality and usefulness. The ornamental dimension, emancipated from any goal or use, is how life insists that it is more than survival. Life receives its divine radiance from that absolute decoration that does not adorn anything. To point out that the Baroque is decorative does not say everything about it. It is decorazione assoluta. Oh, that's fun. Decorazione assoluta. Assoluta. Not absoluta. As if it had emancipated, language, itself from every purpose, even the theatrical, and developed its own law of form. It ceases to decorate anything and is, on the contrary, nothing but decoration. And he goes on to talk about the Sabbath and the society of the spectacle, but I think I'm going to stop there just because it is getting late for me and I don't want all of you to get bored. I think this is this might, I don't know, I'm just really enjoying this. I'm enjoying the flow of his writing. It's making sense to me. And I'm not triggered by the word. I just feel like I should be. Like maybe if I would have read this 5 years ago. But I'm going to just say I know what he's talking about with his word inactivity. And I feel like this is really well written. Like and it's a gorgeous book. It's another polity book that has like mountains and a lake and nature. Oh my gosh, I just love it. It's so beautiful. I'm excited. There's another Byung-Chul book that's coming called The End of Narrative. So tell me whatever you all think of this book. Do you have it? Are you interested in getting it? I would recommend this. Just right off the bat, there has not been a book that I have liked more from Han than The Disappearance of Rituals. I'm so happy that this might join my top books of him and be like one of my 2 favorites now.